Now, this is Dr. Swapnil, and today we will be talking about sterilization and disinfection from the Department of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery for today's lecture. Now, starting with the topic, what is sterilization and disinfection? So, sterilization is a process that destroys or eliminates all the forms of microbial life and is carried out in all the healthcare facilities by either physical or chemical methods. But now these can be carried out through chemical sterilants, which are chemicals which are used to destroy all forms of microbiological life, may it be vegetative or reproductive, and these germicides are used for shorter exposure periods, thereby known as high-level disinfection. Now, it is intended to carry an absolute meaning, means there is no partial occurrence of the procedure, no partial degrees of the procedure, that is sterilization. Once it has to be done, it has to be carried out completely, including all forms of vegetative or reproductive forms or viral forms, may it be the bacterial body or the viral bodies itself or their spores, but according to the guidelines provided in 2008 by CDC. On the other hand, disinfection. What is it? It is a process that eliminates all the pathological microorganisms except for bacterial spores or any kind of inanimate objects, unlike sterilization. So, this is not an absolute process since it is not sporicidal. Now, there are certain other terms apart from sterilization and disinfection too, which need to be heeded. These include terms such as germicides, which include both antiseptic and disinfectant. Now, disinfectants we have read already to the process of disinfection. What are antiseptics? Antiseptics are the germicides which are applying to living tissue, in contrast to disinfectants which are applied only to the inanimate objects. Now, these disinfectants as well as the antiseptics can be of two types, which can be either bactericidal or bacteriostatic. As the name implies, bactericidal agents are those which are capable to kill the bacteria themselves, whereas bacteriostatic agents are those that prevent the multiplication of bacteria, which may, however, remain alive through spores or their vegetative bodies first. Now, germicides differ markedly primarily in their antimicrobial spectrum, like this, and the rapidity of the action. Now, another term which comes into mind along with these is antiseptic, which indicates the prevention of infection, usually by inhibiting the growth of bacteria in the wound or tissue. Now, sepsis, what is it? It is a breakdown of living tissue by the action of the virulent forms of microorganisms and is usually accompanied by infection. Right? Then there are other two terms which are medical asepsis and surgical asepsis. What is the difference? In medical asepsis, the objects which come into the contact of patients, healthcare staff, as well as in the vicinity of the patient are kept as free as possible of agents that can cause infection. Whereas in surgical asepsis, it is purely an attempt to prevent microbes from gaining access to surgically created wounds first. Now, sanitization, which is another term, it refers to the reduction of the number of viable microorganisms to the levels just to be safe by public health standards as established by the authorities, and it should not be confused with sterilization in any case. So sterilization is an absolute entity. It has no waste or no gaps, however possible for any kind of virulent or reproductive or vegetative states of microorganisms, unlike sanitization, where the number only has to be reduced beyond or below a particular level. Now, cleaning. What is cleaning? It is the removal of visible soil or particles, may be organic or inorganic, from the objects and surfaces, so that after cleaning, the other sterilization or disinfecting agent can come in direct contact with the items or the surfaces which require the process for thorough sterilization or decontamination of the surface. Now, it is essential before high-level disinfection and sterilization for the same reason. So, so that the surfaces of the instrument cannot be interfered with the effectiveness of these processes. Now, decontamination removes pathogenic microorganisms from objects so they are safe to handle, use, or discard. Okay. Now, it renders an article or area free of danger from contaminants, including microbial, chemical, radioactive, or any other hazardous processes. It is similar to sanitization, except that it is not connected with public health standards. Now, the basic approach behind sterilization and disinfection. In 1968, scientists who called Spalding devised a basic approach for the process. He believed that the nature of disinfection could be understood readily if instruments and items for patient care were categorized into three, basically critical, semi-critical, and non-critical, according to the degree of infection involved in the use of the items. Number one, the critical items. They included those items which are at high risk of transmission of infection. Now, the objects that enter sterile tissue or the vascular system must be sterile. Why? Because any microbial contamination could be directly transmitted through these. Now, most of the items in this category should be purchased as sterile or be sterilized with steam as possible. These items may include surgical instruments, cardiac and urinary catheters, implants, ultrasound probes, and so on, which are used in sterile body cavity therapy. Now, most of the items in this category either heat sensitive, can be either heat sensitive objects that can be treated with ethylene oxide or hydrogen peroxide gas mask, or other methods including liquid chemical sterilants can be used, which includes the use of glutaraldehyde or glutaraldehyde-based formulations with phenol, phthalate, etc., or hydrogen peroxide-based formulation or peracetic acid-based formulation. Now, the limitations for these chemical sterilants are chiefly that they reliably produce sterility only if the cleaning treatment and proper guidelines incorporating the concentration, contact time, temperature, and pH of the agent are incorporated into the process. Secondly, the devices cannot be wrapped during the processing or in the chemical sterilant as to maintain sterility after processing and during storage is necessary. Now, after exposure to the liquid chemical sterilant, devices will require rinsing with water that is usually not sterile. Now, coming to the second category, which comprises of the semi-critical items, which includes those which contact the mucous membrane or non-intact skin. These may include items such as those used for X-ray and anesthesia, endoscopes, laryngoscopic blades, probes, cystoscopes, and so on. Now, these should be free from all microorganisms. However, small number of bacterial spores within permissible limits are allowed. Intact mucous membranes, such as those of lungs and the GI generally are resistant to infection by common bacterial spores, but are susceptible to other microorganisms such as bacteria, microbacteria, and viruses are included. Now, semi-critical items minimally require high-level disinfection using chemical sterilants, like those which we spoke of earlier. Now, high-level disinfection traditionally is complete elimination of all microorganisms in or on an instrument except for small numbers of be below 6 log 10 special of an appropriate mycobacterium species as per the FDA definition of high-level disinfection. Now, laparoscopes and arthroscopes entering sterile tissue ideally should be sterilized between the patient, and rinsing endoscopes and other such instruments and flushing channels with sterile water, filtered water, or tap water prevent adverse effects associated with disinfectants retained in the endoscope, like colitis for endoscopes which are into the GI. Items can be rinsed and flushed using sterile water after high-level disinfection to prevent contamination with organisms in tap water, such as non-tuberculous Mycobacterium, Legionella, or gram-negative bacilli such as Pseudomonas. Alternatively, a tap water or filtered water rinse should be followed by an alcohol rinse or forced air run. Now, the third category, that is non-critical items, includes those that come in contact with intact skin but not the mucous membrane. These are divided into two: those which come in direct contact with the patient, that is patient care items, and those with environmental surfaces or the vicinity of the patient, including the non-critical environmental surfaces. Now, amongst the non-critical patient care items, which include instruments or items such as bed fans, blood pressure cuffs, etc. In contrast to critical and some critical items, most non-critical reusable items decontaminated where they are used, right, and not to be transported to a central processing area. Now, the most Environmental Protection Agency registered disinfectants have a 10-minute label. Although effectiveness of these disinfectants against vegetative bacteria, certain vancomycin resistant strains like those of Enterococcus, these mycobacteria and viruses are eliminated at exposure times of 30 to 60 seconds. Now, non-critical environmental surfaces. Now, these are frequently touched by hand, potentially could contribute to secondary and transmission by contaminating hands of healthcare workers or by contacting medical equipment that subsequently contact patients. Now, mops and reusable cleaning clothes are regularly used to achieve low-level disinfection on environmental surfaces. However, they often are not adequately cleaned in this instance. And if water disinfectant mixture is not changed regularly, what happens? The procedure actually can spread heavy microbial contamination instead of preventing it. Now, frequent laundering of mops is therefore very necessary, and single-use disposable towels nowadays, which are present impregnated with this disinfectant, are more preferable to the contemporary traditional ones. Now, what is the justification for the use of disinfectants for non-critical environmental? The key concern is the surfaces may contribute to transmission of epidemiologically important microbes such as vancomycin-resistant Enterococci strains and methicillin-resistant Staph aureus strains and viruses. The disinfectants are needed for surfaces contaminated by blood and other potentially infectious materials. These are more effective than detergents in reducing microbial load on floors, and detergents may become contaminated and result in feeding the patient's environment with bacteria themselves. Disinfection of non-critical equipment and surfaces is recommended for patients on isolation precautions by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The advantage of using a single product for decontamination of non-critical surfaces, both floors and equipment is there. Now, some newer disinfectants have persistent antimicrobial activity. Non-critical surfaces contribute meaningfully to endemic healthcare-associated infections. No difference in healthcare-associated infection rates when floors are cleaned with detergent versus disinfectants were noticed. No environmental impact issues were observed with disposal. There were no occupational health exposure issues too, along with low cost and more aesthetically pleasing stores. Now, what have been the major concerns regarding the implementation of this following scheme? Firstly, oversimplification. This scheme does not consider problems with reprocessing of complicated medical equipment that often is heat sensitive or problems of inactivating certain types of infectious agents like corona. Now, particularly for few medical devices in the critical category cannot be steam sterilized because they are heat sensitive. Additionally, sterilization using iodine oxide can be too time consuming for routine investigations such as in endoscope and laparoscopy. Processing of an instrument in the semi-critical category that would be used in conjunction with the critical instrument that contacts sterile body tissues is difficult. Optimal contact time for high-level infection has not been defined or varies among professional organizations, resulting in different strategies for disinfecting different types of chemical items. Now, coming to the basic concept of sterilization. In this, chemical and physical agents are the two key participants for reducing the number of microorganisms present on any surface. Antiseptic, disinfectants, and ethylene oxide gas are the major chemical means of killing microorganisms on any surface. Heat, radiation, and mechanical dislodgement are the primary physical means of eliminating viable organisms, but not the ultimate. Microbes have variable ability to resist chemical or physical agents. This concept is used in monitoring the success of disinfection and sterilization techniques. Principles of sterilization. Now, instruments should be thoroughly cleaned before sterilization. Sterilization agent must be in contact with every surface of the item for a specific period of time and a specific temperature. All sterilizing equipment must be regularly serviced and maintained. Appropriate tests must be applied to check temperature, humidity, and pressure along with the gas content. Then the manufacturer's instructions should be strictly adhered to for its operation and maintenance. Now, the process that has to be followed for sterilization is firstly, it is started with pre-soaking the instrument so as to loosen all the grime or the material attached to the instrument, followed by thorough cleaning, remove all the debris which has been attached. Then it proceeds with corrosion control and lubrication after cleaning, and then packing for sterilization. Now, the risk for non-sterility chiefly reside in the residual number of microorganisms, which further depends on the initial concentration with respect to volume of mass of the articles that have been sterilized, in the volume or surface of the articles that will be sterilized, and the effectiveness of the sterilization is expressed in terms of number of decimal reductions. Now, after sterilization, the average number of microorganisms is referred to as R, which is the probability that an article is non-sterile or risk of non-sterility of the article refers to the product of CO into V or S into 10E, where the European and American pharmacopoeians have sent 10 raised to power of inverse of 1/6 as the maximum limit for the risk of the probability of non-sterility. Now, sterility assurance level. This is the probability of a single unit being non-sterile after it has been subjected to the sterilization process. It is expressed as log 10 into the probability of survival. Each log reduction inversely represents a 90% reduction in microbial population. Therefore, sterility assurance level is equal to 6 times acceptable for critical items. This is used to describe the killing efficacy of a sterilization process, where a very effective sterilization process has a very high sterility assurance level. Now, factors affecting the efficacy of sterilization. These chiefly comprise of cleaning, bioburden, pathogen type, routine, and the cycle. For cleaning, it affects that failure to adequately clean instrument results in higher bioburden, protein load, and salt concentration. These will decrease sterilization efficacy in turn. As per the bioburden, the natural bioburden of used surgical devices is 10 raised to the power of 0 or 10 raised to the power of 3 organisms, primarily consisting of the vegetative state, which is substantially below the 10 raised to the power 5 or 10 raised to the power 6 amount of spores used with biological indicators. As for the pathogen type, spore-forming organisms are most resistant to sterilization and are the test organisms required for FDA clearance. However, the contaminating microflora on used surgical instruments consists mainly of vegetative bacteria. Residual protein decreases efficacy of sterilization. However, cleaning appears to rapidly remove protein load. Likewise, residual salt also decreases efficacy of sterilization more than the protein load. Because, however, cleaning appears to rapidly remove the salt worldwide. Now, the biofilm accumulation. It reduces the efficacy of sterilization by impairing exposure of the sterilant to the microbial cell. Whereas for lumen size or lumen length, increasing lumen length impairs sterilant penetration and may require forced flow through lumen to achieve sterilization. Similarly, with lumen diameter, it similarly impairs sterilant penetration too. As for restricted flow, sterilant must come into contact with the microorganisms. Device designs that prevent or inhibit this contact, like sharp bends, blinded lumen, will decrease sterilization efficacy. Device designs in construction thereby affect the compatibility with different sterilization processes and affect the efficacy of the process. Now, properties of an ideal disinfectant. For the they should have a broad spectrum which can deal with a wide range of antimicrobial strains. Then they should be fast acting and not affected by environmental factors such as the presence of organic matter like blood, or any other, and compatible with food, detergents, and other chemicals encountered during use. They should be non-toxic to the user as well as the patient. They should be surface compatible and not corrode the instruments and metallic surfaces themselves, and not cause the deterioration of cloth, rubber, plastic, and other materials which are present on the pattern. Residual effect on treated surfaces to leave an antimicrobial film in the treated surface. They should be easy to use with clear label directions. They should be odorless or have a pleasant odor to facilitate the routine use. They should be economical and not prohibitively high in cost. They should be easily soluble in water and should be stable in concentration and use dilution. They should have good cleaning properties and should not damage the environment on the surface. Now, for the decreasing order of resistance of microorganisms to these processes, the most resistant ones are prions, followed by bacterial spores, then the coccidia, including the cryptosporidium, then the microbacterial strains like Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the non-lipid or small viruses, followed by fungi, then vegetative bacteria, and lipid or medium-sized viruses Cleaning. Now, cleaning is a form of decontamination which removes organic matter and visible soil or grime that interferes with the action of disinfection. It reduces the bacterial count and includes scrubbing with detergent and rinsing with water. Now coming over to the general principles of cleaning, dirt acts by protecting the microorganisms from contact with lethal agents, which reacting to and inactivating clinical agents. Physical cleaning eliminates large quantities of organisms that are associated with grime. Safe cleaning practices are very important to reduce the microbial load on the surfaces of these items. Manufacturers' recommendations are always needed to be taken into account to protect the devices themselves. Handling of contaminated objects should be kept on the minimum, and a necessary requirement for cleaning is that each object be completely disassembled prior to cleaning to prevent any accumulation of any kind of grime in the system of the item. Now, they can be either utilizing chemical energy as with detergent, thermal energy as with increased temperature to clean, or through mechanical energy that is friction. Now, the agents mainly used are firstly water that contains dissolved minerals such as calcium, chlorine, magnesium, and phosphate. Then it is known as hard water. When boiling this type of water, the aforementioned minerals will be deposited inside the washing wall, sterilizing container, forming a layer known as plaque. More energy will be consumed when dealing with such type of water. Water that does not contain minerals and only has a small number of them is known as soft water and is hence recommended for use for cleaning purposes. Now, a cleaning product should be able to carry on the following tasks, namely emulsification of fats, the qualification of fats, the resolution of all the samples, as well as precipitation, in which the superficial tension of water is reduced in order to permit greater penetration into the. Then dispersion or repopulation, suspension, peptidization, which is the rupturing of protein, then water softening. Now coming to the detergent. Main considerations which have to be kept in mind for choosing an appropriate detergent are: follow the manufacturer's recommendations for the type of the dirt against which the detergent is supposed to be tested. Then follow manufacturer's recommendations about the device or the instrument to be used. If a mechanical cleaner such as ultrasonic cleaner is used, the recommendations as mentioned along with the device as well as the detergent has to be followed. Then take into account the degree of water hardness. Now moving over to lubricants. These are solutions used to protect the instrument. It should not be oily or toxic, but soluble in water. Now the main steps involved in the cleaning of materials include the reception of the items first, followed by their classification into appropriate categories, and pre-washing or soaking, followed by manual washing, utilizing chemical energy, then rinsing off with water, followed by rinsing with alcohol, drying, and finally lubrication. Now, ultrasonic cleaners are the most widely used uh, instruments for cleaning in modern day setups. They are used for cleaning of microsurgical instruments and instruments with huge areas and serrated edges. The main principle being that electric power is transformed into a high frequency sound wave that is further transmitted to the liquid by transducers located under the sound wave then pass at a frequency of 100,000 Hz, even more in the liquid, which are then converted into mechanical oscillation. Now, two types of mechanical waves are generated: high pressure and low pressure. The low pressure ones flow through the solution, causing formation of millions of 0.001 millimeter microscopic bubbles on the surface and cavities on the instrument. Then the high pressure wave cause the bubbles to expand until they become unstable and collapse and creating a negative pressure on the particles in the suspension. This implosion produces localized vacuum areas that are responsible for cleaning the surfaces of the object by a process called sterilization. Soluble particles are dissolved in the solution inside the tank, which includes a detergent that facilitates the whole process, and insoluble dirt is deposited on the bottom of the tank. Now, the advantages of using this is it can clean dirt with some areas that are inaccessible for manual cleaning due to the design of the equipment. The disadvantage is being the equipment requires preventive maintenance and attention to the operational procedures. Then, if the cleaner does not have a rinse cycle, those particles can remain on the device. Then, they have to be rinsed by hand. Then, delicate objects can be damaged. Now, considerations that have to be followed during ultrasonic cleaning. Ultrasonic cleaning cannot be used for optical instruments like rubber, PVC, wood, different types of metals at the same time, or metals and plastics at the same time. They are not recommended for devices with equipment such as irrigation and aspiration handles. This cleaning does not remove encrusted dirt. It is a supplement to manual cleaning, not a substitute or alternate. It can produce polluting aerosols too, and the devices that go to ultrasonic cleaner should be aired out prior to cleaning to prevent the energy of the implosion from diminishing. Now the technique. Elevate the instrument first to relative to the base of the tank by placing a rack on the floor of the tank. The instrument should be open and operator should make sure that larger size instruments do not produce shade areas over the small instruments or cover the small. The water temperature should not be higher than 65 degrees Celsius. The established times are 5 minutes for 20 to 25 kilohertz filter and 3 minutes for 35 kilohertz. Increasing the amount of time is not feasible since the dirt tends to get deposited. The weighted percentage of dirt is in the first 15 seconds. Now, methods of sterilization. Sterilization can be carried out through multiple methods like physical agents as well as mechanical or chemical. Among the physical agents, key forms are sunlight, drying, radiation. Radiation is done through two types: through ionizing radiation, such as X-rays, gamma rays, and high-speed electrons, or non-ionizing radiation like ultraviolet rays and infrared rays. Now, first coming over to ultraviolet radiation mechanism. They have low penetrating capacity. It is a physical process where energy is absorbed by DNA, and this energy concentrates on breaking the pyrimidine dimer strand, thereby inhibiting replication. Now, excessive exposure of skin can produce serious burns. Coming over to infrared rays, this is a very convenient method of sterilization where a large number of syringes in a metal container can be sterilized together with a comparatively short span of time. Most commonly used to purify air, such as the optics. Then coming over gamma radiation, which is a cold sterilization method. Gamma radiations are emitted from a radioactive element, usually cobalt 60. They have very high penetrating power and are lethal to the DNA. They are most useful for disposable and rubber items as well as for regular applications. Then heat. It can be delivered either dry or in a moist way. For dry heat, the mechanism of action can be either denaturation or it can cause oxidative damage or it can cause toxic effects of increased levels of electrolytes. As for as for moist heat, the main mechanism of action can be either protein denaturation and coagulation Then it can be latent heat liberated when steam condenses on cooler surface and hydrolysis and for the breakdown of sterile protein. Coming over to dry heat first, it can be either red heat, flaming, or hot air. Red heat is used for inoculating wires, loops, points, and forces. And such. Flaming is used for sterilization of scalpels, needles, culture tubes, and such. Whereas hot air ovens are used for sterilizing glassware, forceps, scissors, scalpels, and such. And pharmaceutical products like liquid paraffin, fat, and ghee. Now, according to World Health Organization, for dry heat is used if items cannot be autoclaved. Then they have to be sterilized for 1 to 2 hours at 170 degrees Celsius. Instruments may be clean and free of grease or oil beforehand. Now, sterilization by hot air is a poor alternative to autoclaving. Why? Because it is suitable only for metal instruments and for few natural future materials. Boiling instruments is now regarded as an unreliable means of sterilization and is not recommended anymore as a routine procedure in hospital practice. Now, the basic actions during dry heat sterilization is dehydration and oxidation of microorganisms. It has very less penetration power. Since the heat provided is dry, there is no risk for any kind of corrosive action of rust. It is a very time-consuming process and it can be achieved through two methods, either hot air oven or through glass-based sterilization. Now, the hot air oven. It is an electrically heated chamber and is provided with a fan or a blower to ensure rapid and uniform heating. The holding period has to be timed for 1 hour at 160 degrees, where the thermometer first shows that the oven has reached 160 degrees Celsius, not before. Then the oven is allowed to cool gradually for about 2 hours before the door is open. Now, the total time period can be either 45 minutes when the temperature is set for 160 degrees Celsius, 18 minutes when it's set for 170 degrees Celsius, or 7.5 minutes when it is set for 180 degrees Celsius. Not the wrapping material must be heat resistant and instruments should be loosely wrapped. The only advantage of this method is the maintenance of sharp edges of cutting instruments. This requires a long time for completion of sterilization. It is used to sterilize items which do not get damaged by high temperature. It is not used for grease, oil, or powder, and it is not used for fibers and rubber either. Carbon and steel instruments can lose their hardness because of the continuous dry heat. Now, how do we control the sterilization or the sterilization process for hot air oven? For this, four of non-toxic strains of Clostridium tetani are used. Paper strips impregnated with 10 raised to the power of 6 volts are sterilized and inoculated in thioglycolate of 6 media and incubated for sterility tests under strict anaerobic conditions for 5 days at 37 degrees. Or brown tubes can be used which show a green color after sterilization, or thermocouples can be used. Now coming over to glass heat sterilization. These incorporate the use of a heat transfer device. The media used in the device may be glass sheet, molten metal, or stone. The temperature has to reach at least 220 degrees Celsius for a time period of 10 seconds. This method employs conversion of small instruments such as embryonic files and bells into the bead. Now, as for the moist sterilization, if it is below 100 degrees Celsius, then the method employed can be pasteurization. At 100 degrees Celsius, methods such as boiling and sterilization can be employed, and above 100 degrees Celsius, autoclave can be installed. Now, for below 100 degrees Celsius, as for pasteurization, the method can be either Holder's method, wherein the item is heated at 650 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes, or flash method, at which the item is heated at 72 degrees Celsius for 50 minutes. Both are followed by cooling rapidly at 13 degrees Celsius or lower. Now, both these methods are used for sterilization of milk. Then there are vaccine baths, which are also incorporating moist sheet sterilization, that is below 100 degrees Celsius. Vaccines prepared from cultures of non-foreign bacteria are sterilized by heating in vaccine bath at a low temperature of 60 degrees Celsius for 1 hour. Then boiling at 100 degrees. Now, most vegetative forms almost immediately kill at 90 to 100 degrees Celsius, but foreign bacteria requires prolonged periods of boiling. For this, hard water should not be used, and 2% sodium bicarbonate may be added to promote sterilization. For this, Swap or Arnold steam sterilizer can be used. Now, coming over to sterilization. It means intermittent exposure at 100 degrees Celsius instead of continuous. So the main principle behind the process is single exposure kills vegetative organisms. On intermittent heating, what happens is the pores being in a favorable nutrient region become vegetative and get filled during subsequent heating. It is used mainly for gelatin media and media containing sugar. It may fail to kill thermophilic, anaerobic, and other bacteria whose pores do not terminate in a particular medium. Now coming over to moist sheet sterilization above 100 degrees Celsius, that is through autoclave. Now autoclave should be the main form of sterilization at most hospitals. Before sterilizing these medical items, they must first be disinfected and vigorously cleaned to remove all organic material. Proper disinfection decreases the risk for a person who will be cleaning the instrument. Sterilization of all surgical instruments and supplies is crucial in preventing HIV transmission, mainly because all viruses are deactivated by steam sterilization or autoclaving for 20 minutes at 121 degrees Celsius to 132 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. For 20 minutes, if the instruments are in wrapped pack. Appropriate indicators must be used each time to show that sterilization has been accomplished. At the end of the procedure, the outside of the pack of instruments should not have red spots, which may indicate the sterilization has been occurred. Now, what are the main features for autoclave? They are saturated. They provide saturated steam under pressure in a contained chamber. They are cheap and non-toxic. They can even penetrate fabric. The method of choice for all items of those which are moisture or heat sensitive are autoclave. There are 4 parameters of major importance during the whole procedure of autoclaving, which are pressure, temperature, time, and steam. How? Firstly, principle. Water boils when its vapor pressure equals that of the surrounding and atmosphere. First equation P equals to nRT, as you might have read in your lectures. Now, when pressure inside the closed vessel increases, the temperature at which water boils also increases. That is utilized in the main mechanism of action for process of autoclaving. Moist heat acts out by denaturation and coagulation of enzymes and proteins. With the condensation of a large amount of latent heat to the surface, steam penetration is better than hot air resistance. When steam comes in contact with the cooler surface, it condenses through water and gives off its latent heat to that surface. And moisture is together denaturate microbial. Now, there are maybe 2 types of autoclaves presently used. Firstly, the porous phase autoclave, and then the small portable bench type of autoclave. maintained for 20 minutes. Articles which can be sterilized by this method include towels, grapes, future materials, clothes, and rubber. As for the small portable bench model of this, for complete sterilization at 136 degrees Celsius at 32 hours are maintained for 5 minutes. Now, another classification for the autoclaves can be including gravity displacement type, free vacuum type, and vertical or horizontal type. Now, according to structure, they can be either simple non-jacketed autoclaves or high-pressure vacuum sterilizers, or they can also be steam-jacketed autoclaves with automatic air and condensation. Then, according to function, they can be either simple lab autoclaves, multi-purpose lab autoclaves, transportable benchtop autoclaves, large simple autoclaves, media preparators, or downward displacement lab autoclaves. Now, the sterilization cycle, which is incorporated into an autoclave. Firstly, it begins with the warming of the chamber, then vacuum extraction takes place, followed by pre-steam penetration time, then steam penetration time, followed by holding time, and finally the cooling. Now, how do we wrap instrument for autoclave? Firstly, the instrument should be clean. Cassette, front, face, openings on all sides can be used. Those metal trays and aluminum cannot be used for the future of autoclave. The packaging must be covered so that the steam can go for sterilization. Materials used for packaging should be fabric or sealed into biofilms or paper pouches, nylon tubing or paper wrapping. Pins, cables, and paper clips are not advisable at all. In case the pack of instrument is to be stored and not used shortly after the sterilization, the autoclave cycle should end with a arrangement of instruments and packing. How it should be done. Now, the arrangement of instruments should be carried out in trays. Place a heavy or instrument at the bottom of the tray. Place a signal as indicator inside the tray, and then double wrap the instrument set with one. Apply a signal as indicator with the blade saver outside the pack. Now, conditioning of various materials for sterilization. For materials like clothing, they should not be compressed. In equipment for clothing, what will be used first should be placed on the top. It should not be overloaded, and maximum size should be 30 by 30 into 50 centimeters, and maximum weight can be up to 50. For thermosensitive plastic plates, the size over 45 centimeters can be put and placed in a spiral form. For rubber tubing over size of 45 centimeters and placed in spiral form, which first the lumen has to be moistened with distilled water for appropriate action. And for glass cylinders, first the arms and pistons have to be separated. They can be assembled if sterilized with dry heat, but monitoring the heat time for the material. For talcum, small envelopes for 1 to 2 grams can be sterilized. For materials such as plastic, neutral gas bags with hermetic covers can be employed. For gauze, the core should be maintained moving the edges inwards without leaving through a lint. Design is a necessary measure, and they have to be prepared with hydrogen. For dressings, they have to be prepared like now, for boxes of instruments, they should not be overloaded, and maximum weight can be put till 3 kg. They are arranged internally for vegetable use. Now, the elements used for packaging. Packaging material to use can be adhesive tape with external chemical control according to sterilization methods. Then adhesive tape for identification of packaging or marketing tape can be used. Internal chemical indicators of integrators can be used. gauze or protectors for sharp pointed instruments have to be used, and sealers can use in case of mixed or polyethylene. Now, the packaging models that are mainly followed can be either envelope type, rectangular type, or circular. In the envelope type, it's for small, rounded, and light elements. The opening is made on the opposite side. For rectangular type, it's for large and heavy elements, including boxes for instruments and packaging of food. The paper bags are considerable in the variance in size, all of which need to be folded and sealed with tape or sealed machinery. They should be made of medical grade paper, which allows that facilitate aseptic opening of a glossy interior. Now, pouch or window packaging. Two paper films. The folios can be made from polyester or polyethylene or polyester and polypropylene. Now, the size for packaging. For sterilization by steam method of the place, the size should not be larger than 28 into 28 by 47 centimeters. If packages of 25, 25, 20 centimeters use exposure and drying time used, the weight should not exceed 45 kg. For sterilization by dry heat, metal boxes should not contain more than 12 kg. It is not recommendable boxes made from common aluminum since they can release individual particles into the instruments at higher temperatures. Then sealing can be carried out according to the following techniques, that is under restraints or manual folding. It should not be sealed with glass, tin, or other sharp material. It could break the package. Now, the caution to be observed is observe the integrity of the package by looking for wrinkles and bond areas. The sealer should be regulated at an equal temperature level for effective sealing. When carrying out the sealing process, create a minimum margin of 3 cm from the edges of the package in order to permit later aseptic opening of the package should be present. Then sealing of paper and folios made of plastic or polyethylene should guarantee the hermetic seal of the package. Now, the components of the autoclave. It mainly consists of a huge pressure chamber in which the steam is entered through after passing through various channels, including the operating walls, the pressure gauges, air walls, and safety walls. They pass through the chamber and the instrumentation, which are placed within for sterilization, then into and pressure, and then they are again passed through where they can be recycled again. Now, for the sterilization time, autoclave at 115 degrees Celsius at 10 pounds per square inch, it can be kept for 45 minutes, whereas for 121 degrees Celsius at 15 pounds per square inch for 15 to 20 minutes, at 134 degrees Celsius at 30 pounds per square inch for 3 minutes. For flash sterilization, which can be done for emergency situations, can be done at 132 degrees Celsius at 30 pounds of pressure for 3 minutes. Now, how do we store the sterile goods? The instruments are kept wrapped until ready for use. To reduce the risk of contamination, sterile packs must be handled as little as possible. Sterile packs should be allowed to cool before use. Then, to prevent contamination from rodents and cockroaches, material should be stored at least 8 inches over the floor and 18 inches on the floor. Sterile packs must be stored and issued in correct date order. Now, they can be used for culture media, excavation, empty bottles and impervious containers, surgical instruments, wrapped dry goods, and bread. Now, what cannot be or should not be autoclaved? These include items containing solvents, volatiles, or corrosive substances, radioactive materials. The safety procedures that have to be followed are following the manufacturer's guidelines of the autoclave. Autoclave should not be opened when the chamber is pressurized. Avoid standing directly in front of the autoclave door when open. Place autoclave on preventive maintenance schedule. Cool to below 80 degrees Celsius before opening the autoclave. Bottles placed inside the autoclave must not be refilled. The common factors in improper use of sterilizers include chamber overload, low temperature setting, inadequate exposure time, failure to preheat the sterilizer, interruption of the cycle. Now, the sterilization indicator. Firstly, they comprise of automatic process control, then recording thermometers and thermometers. Among the automatic process controls, they are carried out through the sterilization cycle according to pre-selected scheme for duration, temperature, and pressure of each stage. As for the recording thermometer, graphic record of temperature changes in chamber discharge channel, avoiding errors in timing the holding speed. And for thermocouples, when kept inside the test article and attached to the potentiometer, they indicate the temperature inside the test article during operation. Now, the chemical indicators for sterilization, they include brown sterilizer, which have a red solution that turns green when heated at 115 degrees Celsius for 25 minutes. That is the type 1. Then another type 2 brown sterilizer can be that changes color when heated for 15 minutes or at 160 degrees Celsius for 60 minutes as the type 3. They have to be stored at 20 degrees Celsius to avoid premature consumption. For additional states, as in Bowditch autoclave test for steam penetration, like signal log, show a change of color after exposure of sterilizing temperature when applied to the pack and articles in the load. The tape develops diagonal lines when exposed for the correct time to the sterilizing temperature. These are how the tape looks like, mainly disinfected. Before sterilization, the color is light. It changes into a darker shade after sterilization. Or they can be also present in striations, which change color. Now, biological indicators like organisms, including bacillus, stereothermophilus, can be used. The thermophile that requires to be cultivated at 55 to 60 degrees Celsius. Both are killed at 121 degrees Celsius and exposed for 20 minutes. For the preparation, the culture grown aerobically on nutrient agar for 5 days is suspended in water with a concentration of 1 million spores per ml. Small strips of potato soaked in the suspension are dried at room temperature and placed in envelope. Now, how they are used is they are placed in the center of the largest or most densely packed items and some in the coolest part, which is the lowest part of the chamber. After the clearing, the envelope is cut with a triangle and transferred to a recovery medium. For example, like thioglycolate with strict precautions against contamination. Tube incubated for 7 days at 55 degrees Celsius and examined for growth in the form of turbidity. An excessive unautoclaved spore strip is used as positive control and uninoculated tube or medium as negative control. It results in terms of degree of heat resistance of preparation used. This is what the whole treatment looks like. Now, for prior sterilization, for critical and semi-critical devices contaminated with high-risk tissue from high-risk patients require special prion reprocessing. This includes sodium hydroxide and steam sterilization at 121 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes or 134 degrees Celsius for 18 minutes in pre-vacuum and 132 degrees for 15 minutes with Viridian. Low load temperature sterilization technology is effective. Otherwise known for now, there is a comparison chart between the dry heat and sterilization methods versus moist heat sterilization techniques. Some of it. For dry heat, the principal antimicrobial effect is oxidation of cell surface, whereas for moist heat, the principal effect is to denaturation of cell surface. Time necessary for achieving sterilization is shorter for moist heat of the fluid. The equipment complexity and cost is higher for moist heat sterilization systems. The tendency to dull or rust instruments is low for dry heat sterilization equipment. The availability of instrument size, equipment size for office use is good in both cases. Now, for the application of heat, there is thermal depth time, which is the length of time required to kill all bacteria in a liquid culture at a given temperature. Then comes the thermal death point, which is the lowest temperature at which all bacteria in a liquid culture will be killed in 10 minutes. Then there is the decimal reduction time, which is the length of time in which 90% of the bacterial population will be killed at a given temperature. Now, taking Watson law into consideration, the assumption could be homogeneous microbial for homogeneous population, all microorganisms are identical. For single-use inactivation, one it is enough for inoculation. Now, by decreasing disinfectant concentration over time on heterogeneous population, scaling of concave down kinetics is employed with initial fast scale that decreases over time. In multi-hit inactivation, shoulder or concave kinetics is employed where initial flow rate that increases over time. The disinfectant concentration and contact time has to be same weight for contribution in the rate of inactivation and in contributing to the concentration time. This disinfection activity can be expressed as a product of disinfection concentration and contact time. The same values can be achieved with the same amount of inactivation. Now coming over to filtration. Now the technique for filtration is force passage of liquid through a filter of porosity small enough to retain any microorganism contained in them. Positive or negative pressure is necessary to draw the fluid through the filter into a sterile container, for example, a filter jar. The use for sterilizing solution of sugars, vaccine, antibiotic used for culture media can be all filtered. Now the types of filters employed can be urban samples, asbestos and asbestos filters, then centered glass filters, cellulose membrane filters like Zetosol and modern filters, then syringe pressure vacuum membrane filters and HEPA filters. Then the chemical agents and antibiotics. Sharp instruments or other delicate instruments and certain capitals can be sterilized by exposure to formaldehyde, butyraldehyde, or fluoride. If you are using formaldehyde, carefully clean the equipment and then expose it to vapor from paraformaldehyde tablets in a closed container for 40 minutes. Butyrol is a disinfectant that is extremely effective against bacteria, fungi, and a wide range of acids, always following the manufacturer's instructions for each. Then coming to alcohol, the chemical disinfectant. Ethyl alcohol and isopropyl alcohol frequently used. They act by denaturing the bacterial protein in a concentration of 60 to 90% of water. Protein flows with concentration 1% of mineral acid and alkali and acid. Then they are effective against both gram-positive and negative bacteria, although not poison. Isopropyl alcohol is preferred as it is better fat-soluble, more bactericidal, and is volatile. It can be flammable. Ethyl alcohol is effective against fungal spores and used for treating cabinets and incubators listed by them. They can be removed from disinfected articles by cleaning. Then aldehyde, C3 formaldehyde. It is an aqueous solution with a penetrating odor that is polymerized, forming a white deposit in high containers when found in high concentrations and on the articles themselves after prolonged immersion, even in low concentrations such as 57 to 40%. The main mechanism of action being the production of inactivation of microorganisms through the alkylation of the amino and sulfhydryl groups of proteins in the nitrogenous form of uric acid. This causes alteration in the synthesis of nucleic acid and further hampering their replication. The spectrum includes bactericidal things, bactericidal activity like mycobactericidal, fungicide, bactericidal, and sporicidal. Commercially, formalin is 40% with volume solution of in water with 10% ethanol used to prevent polymerization. Borate formaldehyde solution with 0.5% sodium tetraborate and 4% formaldehyde in water used to disinfect clean metal instruments. Then, for gaseous disinfection, the atmosphere should have high relative humidity over 60% and temperature of at least 18 degrees Celsius. The disadvantage of using formaldehyde can be statistically in water in addition to it is considered potentially carcinogenic. Occupational exposure precautions should be taken when this element is used. This indicates for limited indications for hemodialysis filters and the conservation of pathological plasma. Now, another one of the aldehydes is aldehyde or this chemical agent is relatively new and is for high-level disinfection. It corresponds to the group of inorganic aldehydes and contains benzene carboxyl. Mechanism of action mainly being alkylation of several components and directly on nucleic acid. The spectrum incorporates excellent microbicidal activity and higher activity along with mycobactericidal and base activity. The advantages for OPA are mainly excellent stability in a broad range of 3 to 9 and as a result, it does not require activation. It also has excellent compatibility with any type of material or article and has chemical indicators. It is non-carcinogenic, but it's recommendable to use this compound in ventilated areas since it still has not been determined that it can produce irritation in the eyes and nostrils. Main disadvantage being high cost for the usage. Now, instructions that are to follow for the use are the time required for high-level disinfection varies to the following to the standards and levels fixed by the manufacturers. As per the American standards followed by FDA, it's 10 to 12 minutes at 20 degrees Celsius, whereas in European countries it is up to 5 minutes. The concentration for use is 0.55% as per the recommendation. The solution can be reused for 15 days and has a shelf life for up to 2 years. Now, chemical vapor sterilization. Sterilization by low temperature steam and formaldehyde. It can be done by combination of dry saturated steam and formaldehyde. Formaldehyde acts by alkylation of the nucleic acid. Temperatures can be from 127 to 132 degrees Celsius. Pressure can be between 20 to 45, and the timing can be 30 minutes. Advantages being lack of corrosion of instruments and shorter duration, along with suitability for heat sensitive equipment. The disadvantages mainly reside with the requisition for provision of adequate ventilation. Then we come to ethylene oxide gas sterilization. Ethylene oxide is a colorless liquid is a boiling temperature. At normal temperature and pressure, it is a highly concentrated gas with uh, excellent acts by alkylating the amino carboxyl, hydroxyl, and sulfitryl groups in protein molecules and also by damaging DNA and RNA. It is highly inflammable and highly explosive at a concentration of more than 3% of it's carcinogenic and mutagenic in by nature. It has an explosive tendency eliminated by mixing with enough like carbon dioxide and nitrogen to concentration of 10%. It is active against most organisms, including viruses, and is highly penetrative non-corrosive. It is an excellent sterilizer for heat sensitive items and incorporates a very high cost for equipment. The ETO gas for ETO gas effects, a test organism is mainly Bacillus subtilis. The uses can be for heat and moisture sensitive articles like plastic and rubber articles, blankets, pharmaceutical products, heart lung machines, etc. It's not for fumigating rooms since it is very useful. Subjects to be sterilized are put in the cabinet from which air has been removed and the non-explosive mixture containing ethyl gas is introduced to a pressure of 5 to 30 pounds per square inch above atmospheric pressure. Temperature to be maintained at 45 to 55 degrees Celsius and limited humidity to 20 to 40%. Now, the advantages of the reformulated mixing technique. It penetrates the packaging material and device human. Single dose cartridge and negative pressure chamber minimize the potential for gas leak and nuclear exposure. Then equipment is simple to operate and monitor. They are compatible with most medical systems. Whereas the disadvantages chiefly are they require radiation time to remove equipment. Sterilization chamber is relatively small. Then the gas is toxic and carcinogenic and flammable also. The cartridges should be stored in flammable liquid storage cabinet or storage cabinets. They have a lengthy cycle and aeration time. And CFC, which was banned in 1995, present a potential hazard to staff and patient. This is what a ethylene oxide sterilizing unit looks like. Now, it includes packaging, packing of the articles to be sterilized, followed by arranging and loading of the sterilizer, then air removal through a vacuum pump, heating to a required temperature that ranges from 55 to 55 degrees, then steam humidification, maintain the relative humidity of 50%, and exposure to the gas at 5 times for 12 hours or 10 times for 6 hours. Gas removal by 75 vacuum is involved, after which air flush is done by filtered air 4 times to re-establish atmospheric pressure and aeration to dilute residual EBS. Then we come to halogens, chiefly comprising of iodine. Aqueous or alcoholic solutions used as in disinfection. Then they can be actively bactericidal, virucidal, and rarely active against spores. Iodine compounds with non-ionic resin or activating called iodophores are more active and efficient. It inhibits protein synthesis and oxidizes sulfide groups of amino acids. Now, chlorine and fluorinated compounds. These are usually available in liquid form as sodium hydrochloride or bleach and in solid form as calcium hydrochloride. Main mechanism of action being the inhibition of enzymatic reactions and denaturation of proteins and inactivation of nucleic acids. The spectrum mainly lies with virucidal, fungicidal, and bactericidal activity. The main advantage of chlorine and fluorinated compounds is action is fast, low cost, and easy to manage. It has deodorizing properties and microbicidal activity contributable to the unassociated hydrochloric acid. Its efficacy diminishes with an increase in pH. The main disadvantage being corrosive activity and becomes inactive in the presence of organic matter, reduces irritation of the mucous membrane. It is soluble by sunlight and needs to be protected in opaque containers. Chlorine solution should not be conserved in uncovered containers for more than 20 hours due to evaporation of the active product. The main concentration for use in the term being 1000 ppm for 10 minutes for elimination of microbacteria. Objects should not be submerged for more than 30 minutes because of the corrosive activity of the element. Abundant rinsing is also recommended to prevent chemical irritation from possible use. Now, factors affecting the stability of chlorine include presence of heavy ions, pH of the solution, temperature of the solution, presence of biofilms, presence of organic matter, and ultraviolet radiation. Concentrations which can be used in hospital areas are 10,000 parts per million person for disinfection of pills following cleaning, up to 5,000 parts per million, that is 0.5% for disinfection of materials following cleaning, 1,000 parts per million or 0.1% for disinfection of critical areas following cleaning, and 100 to 500 parts per million, 0.01 to 0.05% for disinfection of non-critical areas. Now the dyes. First, you need an Indian dyes. They are bright green, malachite blue, and crystal violet. They react with acid group themselves, more active against gram-positive than gram-negative bacteria with no activity against toxic bacteria. They are non-irritant and non-toxic. They are inhibited by organic material. Then the acridine dyes, including proflavin, acrylflavin, euflavin, and aminoprin. They impair DNA complexes of organisms and destroy the selective capacity of the food and are more active against gram-positive bacteria than gram-negative. Then the hydrogen peroxide. The main mechanism of action for the gas is antimicrobial action performed through production of hydroxyl free radicals that damage the lipid membrane, DNA, and other cellular complexes. The spectrum mainly lies in the suicidal, fungicidal, suicidal activity in concentration from 60% to 7%. The advantages being it does not damage glass or particles, and the disadvantages include an oxygen for metal articles, as it is the presence of neurotoxicity too, and can also produce pseudomembranous splices due to poor rendering. It is indicated in the use of high-level disinfection of endoscopes given its compatibility with this material. As for the use, the concentration can range between 3 to 7.5%. In order to carry out high-level disinfection, the indication is for 6% to 7.5% for 30 minutes. The solution can be used for 21 days on a go. Then hydrogen peroxide gas plasma. It is a new sterilization service technology comparatively based on plasma that was patented in 1967 and has been marketed in the United States in 1993. This has been referred to as the fourth state of matter, apart from liquid, solid, and gas. Then glass plasmas are generated in an enclosed chamber in deep acid by using reduced frequency of microwave energy to excite the gas molecule and produce charged particles, many of which are in the form of free radicals. This process has the ability to activate a broad spectrum of microorganisms, including resistant bacteria. The main advantages in the use lie with the safety for the environment. No toxic residuals are left. The cycle time is 45 to 60 minutes with no radiation necessary. Use of heat and moisture sensitive items can be done because process temperature is 60 degrees Celsius. Equipment is simple to operate, install, and monitor. It is compatible with most medical devices, and equipment requires electrical outlets only. The main disadvantages include for heat-sensitive instruments, microsurgical instruments can be damaged by repeated exposure and may leave instruments wet, causing them to longest potential for causing burns. Then the next is peracetic acid, also known as peroxyacetic acid. This oxidant agent that acts similarly to hydrogen peroxide. Main mechanism of action also resides with the denaturation of proteins, altering the permeability of the cell wall. The spectrum mainly lies in the bactericidal, fungicidal, biocidal, and folicidal activity of the acid. The main advantages for Joule are it does not produce toxic waste and does not require activation. It has a rapid cycle time ranging from 60 to 45 minutes with a low temperature of 50 to 55 degrees Celsius, liquid emulsion sterilization. Sterilants can flow through endoscopes which facilitates solid cooking and microremovals. The disadvantage is that it can corrode copper, bronze, and galvanized iron. This corrosion can be controlled with pH additives. It produces ocular toxicity and irritation to the mucous membrane. Concentrations for the use can be low concentrations of 0.1 to 0.2% for 10 to 15 minutes, and the solution can last for 15 minutes on a single coat. Then coming to phenol, they are obtained through distillation of coal tar between temperatures of 172 to 20 degrees Celsius. Phenol compounds are produced through the substitution of one or two atoms of aromatic hydrogen from phenol to the functional group. The phenol derivatives that are commonly found as the active ingredients of formulations are O-phenylphenol or O-benzyl chloride. The mechanism of action mainly lies with the breakage of cell walls at higher concentrations, penetrating the cell and precipitating cytoplasmic proteins. In low concentrations, they cause the death of microorganisms by inactivating the enzymes in the cell wall. Each spectrum of activity is bactericidal, fungicidal, and virucidal activity, and also inactivated when organic matter is present. Now, the disadvantages with the use of phenol are it can be absorbed by porous materials such as plastic, living waste that produces irritation in the for use. These are indicated mainly in the disinfection of non-critical particles and on smooth surfaces. Its use is not indicated in semi-critical articles due to the absence of data on this chemical reaction. It's also contraindicated when cleaning incubators and other surfaces in the area of new waste since it generates hyperbilirubinemia. Then Lysol. It is used to disinfect linen. Then 3% Lysol, 0.5% phenol or P-chloroanisotol is used for preserving sera and bacteria. Whereas hexachloroquine is toxic and chlorhexidine is a non-toxic skin antiseptic, most reactive against gram-positive and favorable against gram-negative. Then the quaternary compounds. These compounds are commonly used in hospital establishments, and the mechanism of action chiefly lies in the production of inactivation of energy-producing enzymes, denaturation of cell proteins, and rupture of the cellular membrane. The spectrum of action mainly lies in the fungicidal, bactericidal, and virucidal action against only lipophilic viruses. They are not sporicidal or microbactericidal and cannot act against hydrogen viruses. The advantages are good cleaning agents due to their low toxicity, whereas they cannot, whereas wasp and pulmonary, which affect their action to voice a major disadvantage to the use. For their use, due to their low toxicity, they can be used to disinfect surfaces and furniture. Now, for the evaluation of disinfection, there is the phenol coefficient as well as the condition test. For the phenol coefficient, Riedel Walker test is required, wherein the suspension concentrations of equal number of typhoid bacteria as subjected to action of varying concentrations of phenol and of disinfectant to be tested. Then the check margin test can be applied and the for the dilution test, drying bacteria to surface followed by coating with disinfectant and subsequent washing and inoculation in sterile box can be done. Other chemical agents include metallic salts, which is those of silver, copper, mercury, and protein coagulants combined with pre-sulfidal groups of cell membrane. Then liquid peracetic acid under the trade name of stearin is also available, which uses a solution of peracetic acid with hydrogen peroxide, which disrupts and denatures proteins in sterin. Extra oxygen rapidly evacuates many substances, which is corrosive and irritant, and is used as a sterilizer for endoscopes. Now, other disinfection and sterilization methods. Firstly, coming to the disinfection method, a persistent antimicrobial drug coating that can be applied to inanimate objects and animate objects in the form of surfaces. An antimicrobial drug that can be applied to inanimate and animate objects in the form of superoxidized water. As for the sterilization methods, the chemical sterilization process that integrates cleaning in the form of endocrine can be deployed. A rapid 4-hour readout biological indicator for thallium oxide sterilization in the form of a test can be employed. A hydrogen peroxide plasma sterilizer that has a shorter cycle time and improved efficacy in the form of steroids can be used. A yet new low temperature sterilization technology, hydrogen peroxide plasma sterile can be used. These are all relatively newer methods of disinfection and sterilization. Now, firstly coming to surfactant. It is a persistent microbial agent that may be used on animate or inanimate surfaces. It incorporates a water-soluble antimicrobial drug compound, namely silver iodide, in a surface immobilized coating that is a modified polyhexamethylene bigranite layer that is capable of chemical deformation and interaction with the lipid bilayer of the nucleosidal outer cell membrane by electrostatic attraction, followed by the intimate microbial contact with the surface results in transfer of the antimicrobial drug compound that is silver directly from the coating to the organism. Then the microorganisms contacting the coating accumulate silver until the toxicity threshold is exceeded beyond norm. In the death, microorganisms can eventually die and detach from the surface. The amount of silver present and the number of microorganisms contained in the treated surface determine how long the coating antimicrobial activity is retained with the surface is subject to repeated dry wiping or wiping with a quaternary ammonium compound. It can be applied to alleviate a inactive surface targeting induction of strain without prior. Now, it is an excellent addition to virtually all substrates with optically clear and does not delaminate or crack the surfaces, unlike other agents. And the surface contains low levels of sodium iodide and does not cause mammalian cell toxicity. The antimicrobial activity of this coating makes it potentially suitable for a wide range of applications, including disinfection of surfaces, microporous filters, and medical devices, and used as a topical ointment or medical. Now, superoxidized water. The concept of electrolyzing saline to create disinfection is appealing because the basic materials saline and electricity are cheap and dense. That is water. It's not damaging to them. The main products are hydrochloric acid at a concentration of approximately 144 milligrams per liter and free fluoride radicals. This disinfectant is generated at the joint of use by passing the saline solution over titanium coated electrodes at 9 amperes. The product generated has a pH of 5 to 6.5 and an oxidation reduction potential of more than 950 millivolts. The equipment to produce the product may be expensive because parameters such as pH, current, and redox frequency must be closely monitored. Especially generated superoxidized water is perfectly effective in achieving high reduction of pathogenic microorganisms in the absence of organic loading. However, the biocidal activity of this disinfectant was substantially reduced in the presence of organic material. Then hydrogen peroxide plasma in the form of steroid is a smaller version of the steroid 100 which was earlier used. It contains a single shelf of placement for placement of instruments. It is sterilized within a rectangular chamber with two hydrogen peroxide vapor phase methods. The sterilization cycle is for 45 minutes. The radio frequency emissions applied to the hydrogen peroxide product reduces active radicals and reactive chemicals. The plasma reverts to water and carbon dioxide bonds, removing energy. Sporicidal, bactericidal, virucidal, fungicidal, and mycobactericidal activities are noted. No, it is not effective below 42 degrees Celsius or in rapid concentration. So this is where we will halt for now for the process of chemical and for sterilization and disinfection in the present module. The rest will be covered in the subsequent modules for this